Don't mind the loud noises going on down here. Again, we're just trying to find the time and the space to do this. And like I said before, it's just on my heart, and I want to be here for you throughout this journey. It's very important to me that I see it through and that I'm consistent so that you can have the absolute best shot at being consistent as well, which I know that you will be. So let's jump right into our third week, and I'm just going to do a quick recap. So in week 1, we looked at the binge eating cycle, and we wanted to grab that cycle, G-R-A-B, and so there was the guilt, the restriction, the isolation, feeling alone, and the binge. And what we're going to trade that in for is the food freedom cycle. And so instead of the guilt or the shame or the regret, we are going to choose to be satisfied. And instead of restricting, we are going to allow. And then instead of being alone and being isolated, we are going to make the choice to remain and become, if we're not already, connected. And what that's going to do is completely bypass that binge part of that cycle. So we want to reduce the number of binging episodes that we have every week. And if we can just cut down on the number of binging behaviors every week, we are going to eventually get to where that behavior just completely goes away and we find complete freedom around food, and that's our ultimate goal, right? So that was week 1. Week 2, we looked at eating in a state of rest and digest. So it's called rest and digest for a reason. We want to have good digestion with the food that we're taking in and the nutrients that our bodies need. And often in a binge eating state, in a binge eating behavior pattern, we find that there are quite a lot of nutritional deficiencies, and so we end up in this state of being overfed and undernourished. And so we want to move into that rest and digest and out of that fight or flight. And then we answered that big question: if I recover, won't I gain weight? If I attempt to recover from binge eating, won't I gain weight? And we answered that with some truth. If we continue binge eating, then yes, we will gain weight. And so we're just trying to get, again, away from that binge eating and into that food freedom cycle. And so let's jump right into this week's topic. So let's jump into this week and talk about numbers. So what do I mean by numbers? The clock, the number on the clock. That's going to tell us when it's time to eat. The number of calories in the foods we're eating. The number of different macronutrients like protein, carbs, fat. Oh, this number of carbohydrates is just too high, or something along those lines. And then a big one we are going to talk about is the number on the scale, right? So that involves our weight, our BMI, or our clothing size. And I can't tell you how many times when I was binge eating that I would purchase a clothing item that was uncomfortable when I probably should have purchased the size up or 2 sizes up, but I didn't because I was this specific clothing size and I didn't want to be the clothing size higher. And that's just silly, right? Because then 1, I'm uncomfortable, but 2, it probably looks a lot less flattering to be wearing clothing that is too tight. So these numbers, so what are we going to do with all these numbers? The time on the clock that tells us, oh, it's time to eat, or oh, it's not time to eat. And the number of calories in the food, the number of fats, or whatever it may be, and the number on the scale. What are we going to do with all these numbers? This week, we are going to practice letting those numbers go. Letting those numbers go. Listen, we know when we're headed in the right direction. Our mind is more clear. Our energy is higher. Our mood is improved. And even oftentimes our clothes fit better. Do we really want or need, or is it in our best interest to give things like the scale as much power over our lives and over our mood and over our productivity as we should be? I would venture to say that we are giving those numbers far more power than when we should. And for us to move forward, and this is how I was able to move forward, I completely let those numbers go. I honestly just did not even weigh myself anymore. And I still haven't. And I feel and I look a lot better than I ever did when I was in that binge eating behavior. The truth is, there are just so many awesome changes happening that we simply cannot even fathom or take record of just by looking at the number on the scale. And oftentimes our weight may be going down, but there's not health benefits to that number necessarily. So, for example, at one point in my journey, I decided, you know what, I am completely cutting carbohydrates out, completely. And even down to the fruits and vegetables that I was taking in. And what that did for me basically was deplete my body of a lot of essential minerals, and I dropped a lot of water weight. And initially looking at the scale, it was kind of exciting to see those immediate results, but in the long run, it backfired on me, and it really contributed to me feeling very burnt out. And so my big goal with this being our objective for this week is just to let that number go and to begin to shift from those external cues like the numbers towards the internal cues like, how am I feeling? How is my energy? Is my sleep improving? Things like that. And so let's look at the difference between external feedback and internal feedback. So external feedback would be things like, for example, the number on the clock that tells us, oh, look, it's time to eat. Or, oh, I'm hungry, but it is not time to eat. External feedback is going to basically ask us to ignore the internal cues that we're having, such as hunger or pain, in favor of whatever that number that we're looking at externally, or that cue that we're looking at externally is telling us. So another example would be, say that we are in a social gathering where there's food involved, and we look around and we see that most people are putting X amount of food on their plates. And maybe we are really hungry at this meal, and we're used to taking in most of our calories at this particular time. But because the people around us are not, we decide that we are not going to either. So that would be an example of an external cue. And so we put way less food on our plates, and we look around, no one else gets up to get seconds. And so we choose to not pay attention to the fact that, oh, I'm still hungry, I don't feel satisfied, this was my time to take in what I needed for the rest of my workday or whatever it may be, and I'm just going to ignore this because of these external cues. And the interesting thing is, sometimes we create these expectations of us that are completely imagined. Like, maybe we think that someone would be judging us if we ate more food than they are eating, or whatever it may be, when really they're not. Who knows? Maybe they are. But for our sake, this is our journey. Are we willing to give up these imagined expectations, these external cues, in place of embracing and accepting our true needs? So how do we embrace and accept our true needs? We're going to zone into our internal cues, our internal feedback. And what would that be? So an example would be our energy levels. Is our energy level just lagging completely, or is it sky high? And what have we been doing that has contributed to that? Another would be our strength levels, our hunger, our fullness, our satiety levels. How much food do I really need right now? Did I eat too much? How does that feel? Or, ouch, I don't feel so well. Why? And just taking in the feedback that we're receiving from the inside rather than from outside of us. So the big question is, are we going to continue to just hustle to meet these expectations that are completely outside of ourselves, that we can never fully reach anyway, and that contribute to us feeling this chronic level of unworthiness? Or are we going to own our truth pay closer attention to the feedback that we are receiving from within, and finally reach our full potential. And so that is the goal for this week, my beautiful friend. We are wanting to shift from the external feedback that we're receiving to the internal feedback that we're receiving. We want to pay closer attention to the things like, how do I feel, or what do I really want, or how much, or did I make a choice that maybe doesn't feel so good right now, and how can I do better next time? And I highly, highly recommend at some point this week grabbing a journal or maybe finding some paper somewhere that you can begin to document these feelings and this feedback that you're receiving and make changes if necessary. And the big thing that we're going to go over next week is I'm going to share with you some of my past journal entries, because I have all of the journal entries from when I went through binge eating, and it's just been really wild to go back and read through them and remember exactly what I was going through, exactly what I was feeling, and watch that process unfold. And I'm really excited to be able to share that with you. And what I think I'll talk about to begin with in the next video is how I originally developed binge eating disorder. And then from there, I'm going to move on to how, step by step, I recovered. And I have to be honest with you, I did not have professional counseling. I didn't have the support at the time, and to be honest, one major person in my life was very against counseling, and so I just didn't feel supported in that area, and so I didn't go that route. But thanks be to God, who was my counselor, the counselor, who helped guide me and ultimately bring me to full freedom. So I'm excited to share that with you, so stay tuned for that. And just to recap, binge eating cycle, guilt, restrict, alone, binge, swap that out for food freedom cycle, satisfied, allowing, connected. Eating as we allow, in a state of rest and digest. It's called digest for a reason. We want that good digestion. Moving away from fight or flight. Remembering that the weight gain will come on if we continue to binge eat. So our goal is to decrease the frequency of binging. And ultimately, this week, shifting from external feedback, the time on the clock, the people around us, things like that, and into our internal feedback. How do I feel? Am I needing more food right now? Did I get enough protein? Things like that. And big suggestion, grabbing a journal or in some way, somehow, even if it's your phone taking notes, beginning to journal and document your story, because my hope is that one day you're able to share your story with others, and that we can just keep this movement going of complete food freedom. So let's recover together. I'm here for you as your support, as your connected source. And so this week I'll release another workout for us, and like I promise, it's going to be focused on our core, on our abs. And then I'll touch back in with you next week. So I look forward to it. I hope you have an amazing day. I hope you have an awesome week, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much. Bye.